Okay, welcome to the Hungry Poets podcast. I'm here with Michael Thompson.
Hello.
Author of World of the Orb. I was just going to do an interview with him about his process of writing his newest novel and things related to that. So I have a list of questions and just going to go through them.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Yeah. So, how long did you think about the story before deciding to officially make it a novel?
Think about the story. I've been thinking about it since
before you started writing, I guess.
Yeah, so it's been germinating in my mind since I was about 9 years old. That's when I first started drawing some of the maps that you see in the book. Well, the updated, what would become the updated versions. Because back then, I would just fill up my notebook with all of these doodles and these epic battles between monsters happening.
And when was this, grade school?
Yeah, it was in grade school. I would just fill up the margins of my notebooks with all these insane battles, and I decided that these creatures and these civilizations, they needed a world to live in, and eventually all of these ideas would eventually compile into what would become World of the Orb. And I just thought it would be so fun to have a character from Earth get plunged into this magical world and have to find their way out. Yeah.
So I should have asked this first, but can you give a brief description of the book?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
For people who are new.
World of the Orb is kind of like a modern Narnia, but for young adult readers. It involves secondary world concepts like the multiverse and stuff. It's about these two high school students that are on a field trip to the Museum of Natural History, and they sneak away from the group, and in the sealed off room they discover this ancient relic that teleports them into another world. And the story is how they return to Earth, but also how they evolve from these sort of outcast students into these brave heroes.
Yeah. And I could ask how that changes when they come back, but that would be a spoiler, I guess. So I guess I can't, because that'd be an interesting thing to see how they progress from the very end of the story to the beginning. But I can't really ask that question because people haven't read the book. So
read the book. It's good stuff.
Yeah. So I guess the next thing I want to ask is, how did you try to prevent from falling into the trap of a lot of authors get when they write fantasy novels, of making their world too generic? What do you use to make your fantasy world unique instead of making it a fantasy world that everyone knows what to expect from it and stuff? I mean,
yeah, that's a good question. And generally, how I approach fantasy is I don't like fantasy worlds, like you said, that are too generic. That nothing interesting happens. Where it's realistic to the point where there's no room for anything interesting to happen. But then there's other fantasy worlds where the magic is just off the charts and there's no rules anymore. So my general rule is create the world that you wish existed, but make sure that you believe it yourself. So I sort of set up these parameters. I create rules for the magic. It's all sort of based, the magic in the book is all sort of based off of the elements and harnessing the world-building power of the elements of water and weather and fire and stuff. And that was sort of the building blocks for it. And then beyond that, just sort of building out the environments from the ground up, creating the ecosystems for each of the different places, and then of course the big bad guy and what he's all about.
Ecosystems, that sounds complicated, but
it's each place should have
a unique feel or
unique feel. I know more about the world than what's put into the story, and that sort of lets you know that you're looking through sort of a peephole at this much bigger thing. So I just know sort of the general what the flora is like, what the fauna is like, and then also what the sort of the powers of the elementals are like in each of the different places that the characters travel.
And the next question that I want to ask you is, did you import elements from your personal life into the characters from the story, and is this something you try to avoid, or is this something that authors should embrace? Depending on
depending
on the extremity, I guess. But
sure, Yeah, I think it should definitely be something you embrace, but I don't think that it's something that I necessarily do consciously. It's something I find out later as I'm rereading. I'm like, oh, this character is a lot like my grandfather. Oh, this character is a lot like my dog. The two main characters are definitely an extension of myself. Marvin is definitely sort of my analytical self, the person that thinks and analyzes things and is very much themselves. And then Andy is very much my social, goofy self. And each of them are sort of those two parts of myself. I can see that
a lot in you. So
But then pushed like to their own extremes, so then they become their own
two separate characters.
Yeah. So that was something that I did, and then also the other characters sort of have they're all kind of like amalgams of your experiences, aren't they? You know, they kind of it's what you experience in people, the best qualities of people, and in terms of the villains, the sort of their own sort of crazy rules and what the I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, basically what I'm trying to say is you take amalgams of your experiences and they sort of reshape into their own characters.
So I know, like in high school, they told me, like in my creative writing class, that one of the pitfalls young writers fall into is taking their own life and then making it, just changing small things and making a story and saying like, okay, if it I can't write this because it didn't happen that way. When you start to get when that starts to happen, that's really bad. But like, I think what you're doing is an excellent example of how to use personal things about yourself or other people that you experience and put them in a story. But like, you don't want to fall into the wrong, like doing it the wrong way, of course. But that's kind of hard to do that because you have to like have everything in there. But like, yeah, that's kind of terrible. But yeah, okay. I think that's the end of that question, right? Unless you had something else to say.
No, I think it's a really good point. I mean, you don't want to. Stories are sort of what you wished happened in the real world. Or, you know, we as storytellers, you tell something fantastic that happened.
Yeah.
You know, I sort of I see what you're saying. I don't really like the type of literature where it's trying so hard to be realistic that nothing interesting happens.
Yeah.
You know, you don't go home and say, "Oh, you won't ever believe what happened to me on the way to the store today." What? I bought some eggs. You know, it's like, oh man, you know, it's like now if aliens had come down and you know, and you had to fight an intergalactic war, that's pretty cool. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're right. I like plunging the mundane into the extraordinary, or vice versa, and then seeing how those two elements sort of cope with each other. I think a story naturally sort of unfolds in the reactions and between the unusual and the recognizable.
Yeah, that makes sense. So on top of that, like in addition to taking things from an author's own life, they can also take things from other works of fiction, but this can get more like you don't want to get into this territory too much as well, because like then you'll get charged with plagiarism. But like everyone does this. When authors, they take things they learn from other works and put them in their own works to make a better work. I mean, like, how do you see how do you see this rolling out in the World of the Orb story? Like, I mean, like how much of the elements actually like were directly inspired by other works of fiction, or did you like try to stay away from that as much as possible, or like?
I didn't sort of consciously lift anything. I mean, I know the types of stories that I like. You know, I like high fantasy. I like accessible fantasy, and I like a lot of movies. I think that authors can learn a lot from watching film, because something that I think authors sometimes don't do well is pacing. So something I really enjoy is like I love the Marvel movies, I love superheroes, and I love the Star Wars movies and these big epic adventures. But despite their scale and despite the scope of the world, we follow a very tight group of characters, and the pacing is good. The pacing is something that I wanted to keep cinematic, so that all the important stuff seems to happen at at a movie's pace, even though you feel like you're going on this big long adventure every time you step into that world. So yeah, pacing is something that I definitely sort of drew inspiration from.
Yeah, that's a good thing to draw on, especially when you're not actually like taking like plot lines or things. I mean, that you can get in trouble for that, but especially like with the Aragon story, like it's like Christopher Paolini, he wrote a book called Aragon. It's like pretty much the plot of Star Wars and the Lord of the Rings setting. So,
yeah, I think I heard that. I never actually read Aragon.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something that you don't want to. That's where beta reading comes in, and it's like
and catches that.
Yeah, I've had people read World of the Orb and say that it's sort of reminiscent of it reminds them like some of the themes, like Shamal, the bad guy is it's very. The faceless villain is sort of
that's a common
trope.
theme from
it's a trope,
everything.
like you see like Dr. Doom or Darth Vader, and I always love the faceless villain, but he's not those villains,
Well, doesn't he appear in the book though? I mean, like talking.
Oh, he appears in the book.
He's not really faceless.
He wears the mask.
Oh, okay.
That's what I mean. Literally faceless. In that he's covered.
Okay.
In that there's something to hide. In that he's hiding behind something.
Yeah. Because I used to write fiction where like the villain is always someone who's never appears in the story, to make him seem more menacing. Because once he appears, the mystery's gone.
That's a trope as well, sort of like Jaws. Even, things where they're withheld.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's definitely there are tropes that I pulled upon, but I never pulled upon drew upon actual. Sort of characters, and I'm just like, I'm going to take this guy and actually change the name. No.
At least until the copyright expires.
Then it's all fair game. No, I think, but it's important to look at what you like and then say, I like that, but I wish it was like this. So that's sort of where your playground opens up.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question. So this is a basic question. What are the main themes of your work? If you could just describe it briefly, and do you think these themes end up being applicable to the lives of ordinary people and like?
Yeah, I think the most major theme is Marvin deals with a lot of self-doubt.
Yeah,
and he doesn't think very highly of himself, and he's sort of accepted his role as an outcast, like a nerd, and like a sort of a nobody, just a face in the crowd. But then suddenly he's plunged into this place where he begins to unlock these powers that he didn't have on Earth. So suddenly he's sort of swelled with all of this purpose and this power, and it's sort of the theme of the humble will become exalted.
Yeah,
is sort of the theme of this book.
I had a question about writing dialogue, but I guess like the only reason I'm asking this is because I can't write dialogue, so I'm just asking like how do you do it? I mean,
dialogue. I think dialogue is just a matter of, it's not so much knowing dialects or how a person's going to talk. That helps.
Yeah.
Especially if somebody talks with an accent or has a particular inflection or certain verbal habits. But I think it's just a matter of spending a lot of time with your characters before you put pen to paper.
Yeah.
Spending a lot of time mentally and understanding who they are as people and where they come from and what their histories are. And so I think that when you know your characters to that extent, as if they were real people, as if you could have a conversation with them, then when you put them together, they're just going to naturally start to bounce off of each other.
Yeah. And the next question: Did you have to do any research when writing the book? For example, I'd like to find out how people went certain distances in like reasonable amount of time, like how long that would take them to walk and stuff like that, like technical things. Like how do you go about research, or like just things about like how like the physics of the world works, or like possibly, or like other things.
Yeah, well, I knew that I was working with a fantasy world, and the world is slightly smaller than Earth, and it has 2 moons, and there's all these different things that's going to affect like the tides and how quickly you're going to go from one place to another. But that's something that's very freeing about fantasy, is that if you do end up getting something wrong, you could just say it's fantasy.
Yeah.
But I tried my best to understand the science of how
like
things
within
work.
the actual world you created, I guess.
Yeah, within the world, I have later in the book, and sort of in the 4/5 of the way through, there's sort of this volcano. I was going to have this volcano scene, and after I researched volcanoes, I realized you cannot get anywhere near lava, otherwise your skin will start to boil. So I was like, and that's something that actually changed how I wrote the story. I was like, I wanted to.
So like in the first draft, it was like they were close to the lava, and then like, or did you not get that far?
I hadn't gotten that far. In the first draft, I had gotten sort of halfway through, and this was
Yeah.
just beyond the point where I went back and rewrote.
Yeah.
But I was doing my research at the time, and I decided, okay, I'm going to change this into sort
Yeah.
of like the fossil of a volcano, and
That makes sense.
And it got converted into this big stronghold that were all these sort of like kind of like a castle, but in the husk of a fossilized volcano. That was called Titan's Maw.
Yeah, and I noticed there's orcs in the story, so like that's kind of like a generic fantasy, like
Sort of popularized by
Yeah.
Tolkien.
Yeah.
But even he sort of lifted it from old folklore.
Yeah.
But yeah, orcs are something I'm really into.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I think they're good.
I don't blame you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're good henchmen. They're good opponents.
Okay, so a lot of authors, for example, R.L. Stine, even though he writes these horror stories, he writes stories about like how he tries to keep the real world horrible situations out of the book, because like he doesn't want children to have to like face that situation.
Right,
so like
right.
such as like divorce of parents or like family issues.
Right.
I don't think there was much of like real world problems in the book, but like it's more of like escapism, I guess. But how do you see, like, after this project, how do you see yourself approaching these things if you write another book aimed at children? Like if you get to a situation where like there's something children would actually be horrified by. I mean,
Yeah.
or like
right.
do you always see yourself distancing yourself from it?
Well,
Or
I
like-
think the reason that authors sort of distance themselves, if they're writing for younger readers, is
Yeah.
because when you're a kid, your biggest worry is sort of, bullies, fitting in,
Yeah.
growing up. Those are sort of the themes that you want to tap into, I think, with a younger audience. Friendship, collaboration, all those things. And World of the Orb is slightly older than that. It's young adult. So there are some themes of sort of loss and stuff
Yeah.
tackled, but these are characters that are sort of on the cusp of entering adulthood
Yeah.
and about to get this onslaught of new responsibility.
Well, I guess what I'm talking about, like even as an adult,
Yeah.
like as an adult book, would you also like are the themes like you'd want to stay away from because like they'd be like too horrible to like think about for yourself or for other people? Like,
Yeah, I don't know. I think.
I guess I don't know why I'm asking this question.
So what's the worst thing
Yeah.
to put in a book? I don't know. I don't think anything's off limits with literature, and it
Yeah.
just depends on the book and how you handle it. I don't think I'll ever say I'll never write about this one thing, because at any point you could become inspired and say
Yeah.
that this could be a good way of tackling this otherwise kind of
Yeah.
tumultuous theme.
Yeah, I guess like some authors try to stay away from some themes because like they don't want to think about it. Like it's too horrible for them.
Yeah.
But I guess like yeah,
They could write for the escapism, like you say, and
yeah,
not want to worry about.
yeah. It's to get away from the real world, I guess.
Yeah, and that's something that's great in fantasy.
Yeah,
But in a roundabout way, you can use fantasy, an entirely separate world, to sort
Yeah.
of diagnose issues of the real world.
yeah. I think we already discussed this, but like this question was about how you achieve the passing rate of the action in the story, like how like every action flows to another. Like,
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I sort of that's sort of a pacing thing.
Yeah.
And I like to. Basically, if an action happens quick in my mind, no matter what, I try to be as detailed as possible.
Yeah.
But if an action happens quick, I want to describe it quick. And if it
Yeah.
happens slower, then you draw it out, and you get even more detailed, and you hone in on certain things. And the longer the way I read, the longer it takes to describe something or an action, the slower the action happens in the book. So that's
Yeah.
sort of how I pace it.
Yeah, that's good. So, who are your favorite authors?
I really like Brian Jakes. He wrote the Redwall series.
Yeah.
Which was I love the escapism of those books. We were talking about escapism, and he had all these songs and poems scattered within them as well. And he built out this crazy fantasy world that's only populated by animals.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool. I like occasionally I'll read my father's science fiction collection, and I'll read some of the Herbert stuff, like Frank Herbert and Brian Herbert. But yeah, that's sort of Brian Jakes is my guy. I'll always crack open a book of his and enjoy his fantasy world. And the feasts are amazing in those books. You can taste everything.
Do you listen to music when writing ever?
No.
No? I guess it can mess with your...
Sometimes I'll listen to music when I'm editing.
Yeah.
But only instrumental.
Yeah.
But I don't like, especially I don't like any music that has words in it, because
that'll screw with what you're thinking.
I just like it perfectly silent. I'm unlike a lot of authors I know where they like to go to the coffee shop and have that sort of like humming background noise.
Yeah.
And I can understand that, but I just like it absolutely silent when I write.
Yeah. So how many drafts did you take before you got to the final version of World of the Orb? Or how many did you start over from scratch once you finished them?
I only started over from scratch once.
Okay.
And that's when the first draft of World of the Orb I started writing when I was about 12 or 13. You know, I had done my first children's chapter book, and then I was itching to write something else, and I had this idea brewing at the same rate that I was doing some of my other stories, and so I started writing this, and I put it away, I came back to it, I put it away, I came back to it, and eventually when I was about 16, I had gotten halfway through, and I had really picked up the pace, and I really started to fall in love with this world and these characters, and I thought, this is awesome. But when I went back to the beginning, because I had taken so many breaks in between, I noticed there were definite inconsistencies with my writing. I had evolved as a writer, and my writing had really changed from the beginning to the middle of the book.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no. And some of my friends were like, well, just edit it out. And I could have, but I knew it wouldn't be the same, so I just went back to the beginning, and I started writing all over again. And I'm glad I did, because...
did you keep the same plot line, or did you change it?
Yeah, I kept the same plot line. I changed some of the side stories.
Yeah.
And I made it more streamlined. But otherwise, all the major themes are there. Just they turned out more mature, and they made more sense when I rewrote them.
Yeah.
So, and I was glad I did.
Okay, so another big thing for authors is that they have to make a choice between what they want to write and what their audience wants. So, how do you avoid alienating your audience while staying true to what you want to do in your story?
Mm-hmm. I only write the stories that I would want to read.
Yeah.
And I don't really think too hard about how people are going to perceive it, because that sort of, I think, is a slippery slope to stifle your creativity.
Yeah.
I just operate under the assumption that if you write what you love, chances are there's going to be people out there who have the same tastes as you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 more questions I have written down.
Okay.
Do you think the fact that the characters are from Earth, actually, sort of like the Narnia series, is something that actually is an important part of the themes of the story, and actually affects the story, because takes the familiar into something that's strange, I guess.
Yeah, like I said, that's my favorite type of story.
Yeah.
Where
I guess we already covered that.
I think but I think why it's important is because the reader begins to understand the world at the same rate as the main characters.
Yeah.
So it doesn't operate like a lot of other high fantasy stories where you receive this sort of history, this big history of the world, and it's like, okay, here's the story. And whereas it sort of unfolds naturally.
Yeah.
You learn it at the same rate as the characters.
And is there a particular reason why you paced each chapter as a certain length? or did you just write until you're done writing the chapter and then just cut it off, or did you like try to keep them certain lengths for like what's required for each chapter?
Yeah, I didn't consciously try to like aim for a word count or a page count, but they all turned out to be fairly symmetrical in length, and I don't really go by, okay, I'm going to go this many words in or this many pages in. I just know I got to go from this event to this event within the confines of a chapter, and I sort of have a rough outline of like, okay, this is what's going to happen in this chapter, but it's loose, and it gives lots of opportunities for your characters to surprise you and for things you weren't expecting to happen and actually drive the story forward in a way you weren't expecting.
Yeah. So the last thing I think is what's the official explanation about how like the characters, they can the ones in the World of the Orb world can speak English when they're not from that country, I guess. I mean that
world, yeah. So how do you go from Earth to Encartai in the case of World of the Orb, and how is most people able to understand each other? The easy explanation is because otherwise you wouldn't be able to read it. Yeah. You know, they wouldn't be able to
be a short story.
It would be a short story. They'd be lost forever. Trying to understand these people. But the way I interpret it, there is a short section in chapter 2. I think it's chapter 2. Yeah, it's in chapter 2, and where Marvin is sort of describing when he's starting to realize that he's not on Earth anymore, because they don't realize it right away.
Yeah.
He starts to notice the slight changes in the air and the slight changes of the gravity even, and the slight changes in the flora and the fauna, and it all sort of hits him at once, and he also realizes that he himself is different in some way, and that's sort of all that hints at my personal explanation of why people are able to understand each other, is that the characters themselves have undergone sort of a transfiguration when they went through the orb, that they have been sort of put back together in the elements of the world, and that they are kind of an Encartai version of their earthly selves. Even though they're still themselves, they're sort of put together in a new way, and that's why I think they're able to understand each other.
Yeah.
Their understanding of language becomes the common tongue in World of the Orb, and they interpret that as whatever language the book is written in this case English. So that's my explanation.
That's very interesting.
But also, mainly just so you can read it.
Yeah. So where can people get your book, and like how much is it and stuff? Like,
you can get World of the Orb on Amazon.com for $18.99. It's also available on BarnesandNoble.com and my website worldoftheorb.com. You can read more about the book there, and there are links to get the book there. You can follow me at Twitter at mthompsonbooks, MTHOMPSON books. And on my Facebook page, World of the Orb, facebook.com/World of the Orb, and I post lots of fun stuff there.
Okay. Any other thoughts before we close out?
Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks.
My first podcast.
Yeah.